What do we do when we have a problem? We ask help from our friends, family, experts. Or if we are in the mood of doing something adventurous, we go to our relatives. And what happens next? They tell us what they think is the right solution. And then we try to find the best solution amongst all of them. And then when we do find a solution, we try to validate that. Am I right? But what if I tell you that that is not the right way to find a solution? Because things don't always seem to be the way they are. Let me help you understand this by telling you one of my favorite stories about my friend Siva. Siva was a dreamer since childhood. He was both brilliant and creative. He loved to get his hands on something new every day and enjoy the challenge. When it came to choosing a career, Siva wanted to be an architect because he was fascinated by buildings. But as fate had it, he was thrown into the field of production engineering because that seemed like a right choice according to his parents. Of course, that's not something that he wanted to do. In every single semester exam, he would put his head into the books and say, "I can't do this anymore." But here's the thing about Siva. He was determined and managed to pass the course with distinction. But yet, he was only able to get a job in a software company where he worked for the next 3 years. And he didn't want to do that. What he experienced, most of us have in some way or the other. A decision or an opinion was forced upon us that made to change our lives. What happened to Siva next is very interesting. But before I get into that, let me talk to you about that one mission that made the world stand up and respect the Indian Space Agency, the Mangalyaan or the Mars mission. In 2011, when ISRO's Mars mission was about to take off, they had to fight many battles, such as a shoestring budget, lack of resources, very little build time, and technological challenges. But perhaps the most unique problem they had to solve was that they didn't have a rocket powerful enough to send the satellite directly into the Mars orbit. Their hands were tied, quite literally. The mission was dubbed a failure even before it had started. And yet, they managed to come up with a unique solution thanks to the power of first principles thinking. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You see, they knew that they could use a direct path because they didn't have a bigger rocket. So instead, they chose an elliptical path to literally sling the satellite out of the Earth's orbit. This one idea became the highlight of the Mars mission simply because this kind of a trajectory was never used before. But it worked thanks to first principles thinking. I'm sure all of you are now curious to understand what first principles thinking is, or rather, how the Mangalyaan team used first principles thinking to solve their problems. First principles thinking, which is sometimes called as reasoning from first principles, is a 3-step process which one can use to solve complex problems and generate original solutions. The first step of our FPT is very simple. We need to be curious and remove assumptions. Understand that whenever we find a problem, we are always surrounded by these assumptions. We need to identify them and remove them. And that's exactly what the project heads at the Mars division did. While everyone was talking about a bigger rocket, they asked, what if this is just an assumption? And they went out of their way to find an alternate solution. And that's where comes step number 2. We need to look at the problem stripped of all these biases and all these assumptions that are there in our mind. And we need to ask, what is this problem really about? Or what is the best method to solve this problem? When these questions were being asked by the Mangalyaan team, they found some underlying principles that could help them solve the problem. And they found that they could use lightweight materials, use miniaturized designs, change the design of the satellite, or even use a smaller rocket. These are what we call the first principles of the problem. Principles that can lead us to a unique solution. And that's where comes the third step. We need to find that one insight from all of these first principles that can help us lead us to the solution and from there to the outcome. Alright? Now, when the Mangalyaan team did this, they used the elliptical paths instead of a direct one that became a solution that was in one word, revolutionary, pun intended. To sum up, the first principle thinking is all about removing assumptions, identifying the first principles, and then coming to a unique solution. I'm sure you're now wondering, why FPT isn't talked about more if it is indeed such a powerful concept? Or why we don't use FPT to solve our problems? The answer to this question, believe it or not, lies in your childhood. What if I told you that you used FPT as children but somehow just stopped? As I mentioned earlier, the first step of FPT is to be curious and remove assumptions. And as children, did we have a lack of curiosity? Of course not. For example, we were never shy of giving a very ambitious answer to the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Some of you must have wanted to become a doctor, a policeman, a hockey player, a footballer, a cricketer, or even an astronaut. I bet at least one of you must have said, I want to be Superman. My question to you is, my dear friends, what happened to that imagination? Those thoughts that were a part of us? I believe that most of us let other people tell us what's possible and what's not. Not just regards to our dreams, but also with regards to our ideas, aspirations, and wishes. I'm not saying that we can just change our career like that or become a Superman. All I'm saying is that if we really want to do something, then why can't we just pursue that with all our heart, devoid of all the assumptions that are there? Let's get it back to Siva here. Let's look at this from this perspective. Because he was good at academics, he was told he had to pursue engineering. And he took up the first job that he got because he was told that he needed to start earning money, only to feel lost. But here's what Siva did next. He started to question all these ideas that were forced upon him, and he realized that this is not what he was meant to do. And finally, he shed all those assumptions that were a part of him. He finally quit his job and went on to do his master's in design. It took him 4 more years to finally realize his dream of being a designer. Today, he works for one of India's biggest firms and is also a freelance UX designer. And trust me, my dear friends, I have never seen him happier. And here's how I used FPT to solve one of the biggest challenges of my life. This was about a time when I was writing my first book and I was looking for a traditional publisher to represent me. There I was, a debut author with 0 industry contacts. I even looked at the numbers. It seems that 10 out of 1 million first-time authors actually get a publishing contract. The numbers were against me. But then I asked, yes, I understand the odds are not in my favor. Yes, I don't have the right contacts or the credibility. But what if all of that is just an assumption? I went back to the drawing board and I asked, what are the first principles of this problem? What would the publisher ideally want so that they will be happy to represent me? And that's when I realized that any publisher would want a book that would sell well and would uplift the brand. So I went back and I worked on my book. I hired an editor, and by the time both of us were done, it all came down to get someone to notice it. And that wasn't easy as well. It took me half a year, hours of research, and at least 100 phone emails to get a publisher notice it. But I did it. I was represented by one of India's top 5 traditional publishers. Trust me, it wasn't easy. But imagine if I had never looked beyond those assumptions. Imagine if I had never asked, what does a publisher want? Had you ever come across a problem where you thought, what's the point? That's where FPT can be so powerful, my dear friends. It can give you an insight that will change your perspective. All you need to do is follow 3 steps. Number 1, be curious and remove assumptions. Number 2, identify the first principles. And number 3, generate a solution and from there an outcome. Now here's a good and a bad news for you. The good news is that, yes, it's that simple. The bad news, however, is that it's not as simple as it looks. Simply speaking, we've been blinded by so many assumptions that it's difficult to even identify them. And when we do come to a solution, there are so many people around us ready to tell us why something won't work. And that includes you. Think about it. You find a problem. So you try to remove the assumptions and you identify the first principles. But somehow the solution doesn't work. You immediately go back to square one. Some of you may even curse me. That damn TEDx speaker giving us ideas that don't work. But as much as it sounds hard, I want to ask you, what is it? Imagine how hard it must have been for Siva to do tedious, unrelenting work for 8 years. Imagine how hard it must have been for me to keep thinking that I don't even deserve a publisher. ISRO was made a mockery of right until the point that the satellite reached the Mars orbit. Before I go, I want to leave you with one last thought. I'm sure most of us here don't believe in superstitions. Hey, we may even scoff at people who do believe in them. But if we are going to take advice and seek validation from people who never tried something different, or didn't take the right effort, or didn't push themselves enough, or just ran out of luck, then we are not in any way better than those who believe in superstitions. Because we are also assuming something to be true based on what someone has told us. Are we going to be a product of what someone has told us we could be? Or are we going to be a product of our experience, our efforts, and most importantly, of our heart and our mind? To quote William Ernest Henley, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. Yes.